Greetings, various assorted salutations. Welcome to one of the last lectures for U.S. History 3. What we're looking at is a little bit into the 21st century. We won't go in too deep. Just in case we're wondering, this is recorded January 2021 is when this recording is being done. And what an interesting year we have started ourselves off with. Let's go with that. In case you're wondering, roughly, very roughly, this is covering the last subsection of 19.5 in our textbook, a little bit of 20.1 and some aspects of 20.2. We're going to be more technology focused in this particular one, as you can see here. Technology and economy. Those are our topics. So really the theme of the 21st century, at least to kick things off, is technology has marched on and the daily lives of Americans has radically changed with developments in computers, specifically the personal computer, and with the internet. Additionally, we have factors like globalization, which will create opportunities and challenges that will likely frame the events of the early 21st century. And what a century we have gotten ourselves into. Anyways, let's start with the computers. This quote is something I like to put up in there. The Internet's pace of adoption eclipses all other technologies that preceded it. Before that, it took 38 years for radio to really settle in. TV hit that in 13. But it only took 16 for PCs to really take off. And then once you throw in the internet, that really adds things in there. Just go into the basics of computers. There's a lot of history. You can go all the way back to Babbage. Really, computer technology gets pushed along partially due to the Cold War in the United States, because the idea behind the computer technology is it will aid in the defense of the U.S. Additionally, things pushing technology, the space race, doing weather calculations, those kind of things. But early computers, really old computers, some of the first computers that we think of as computers, were massive hulking things that ran calculations. Computers of the 70s, computers of the 80s, were these bulky, massive things that could take up a room. They used a ton of power. Like this one, the Cray 2 supercomputer has a giant coolant tank. And its processing power is actually that of an iPad 2 nowadays, which, as you probably know, the iPad 2 has been phased out recently, and so it's actually what you probably carry on your person right now is superior to almost anything that has existed up to this point for processing power. But these things, I think this one occupied like a 16 square foot area. It's massive, for example. But the computer that will start to change it, because if you look at these computers and you tell people, yeah, nowadays we've got people using things like that can fit on your lap, it's kind of incredible. But the personal computer is one of the revolutionary technologies that gets developed. Companies like IBM and Apple are going to get computers into the workplace and also into the home. And really, you're going to see some different technology developments there. In offices, initially, computers are going to be very useful for carrying out very complicated tasks, like calculating budgets, tracking things, calculating things. Really, a lot of the early uses of computers are perhaps not the most interesting to the average high schooler, admittedly, because what they do is run calculations and track data, allow you to organize information. If we want to talk about computers dating back further, computers were used to calculate things with census data, survey results, stuff like that. It doesn't feel that interesting to the modern person nowadays, but the idea that you could, tabulate data was a huge thing with computers. But the other big innovation, which this will kind of hurt the administrative assistant secretarial industry, is that computerization will eliminate a lot of jobs and allow them to be condensed into fewer and fewer people. One of the big ones that comes out of that is, especially with computers, it used to be that you'd have designated typists. Well, now theoretically, with a bit of basic training, you could have people type their own documents instead of like doling it out to a more secretarial position. And so one of the things we're going to see, and that is really only just now being realized, is that the administrative assistant position is going to largely decrease as you can put more and more onto computerization. But computers, the big thing, if you want to think of computers in the simplest way possible, they allow people to carry out complicated tasks very, very quickly. Instead of doing the complicated math equations for like launching rockets in your head on a piece of paper with a slide rule, crack out a computer, program it to run the calculation, and then input your variables. That's what computers do, is they take very complicated tasks and they calculate them faster than a human can. But by themselves, computers are very impressive. But the internet is going to be one of the things that really makes a difference in computers. This is an early map of the internet. You'll notice some places: Harvard, NYU, the Pentagon. There's a few military facilities here. Hawaii's in here, etc., etc. But what happens is the internet is originally a DARPA project, and essentially the idea behind it is it would be really nice for different research facilities, the big colleges that carry out research, to exchange information and be able to do so over great distances. The telephone was a major innovation, as we've studied in previous portions of this course. Or if you're in U.S. History 2, we talk about the telegraph. But really what the internet does is allows for the transmitting of very complicated information and doing things like that. And that's why internet is very important initially. Is partially it allows them to share research results. And also one of the other side goals of the internet was to be able to transmit data quickly. In the event of a nuclear attack, one of these facilities was likely to survive. One of the early places to get the internet, for example, was a Norwegian weather station, which was really just a facility to track nuclear testing being done by the Soviet Union. And having the internet there, you could have all your observation equipment set up and transmit that data through this network. But when the internet becomes more accessible to the general public, that's the internet that we start to know, that you, the students, are using probably to watch this video. Is what the revolutionary aspect of the internet is: the ability to access information. In fact, we call this current era, some people call it the 21st century, this portion of it, the information age, or the age of information, because at this point, at your fingertips, you have access to more information than most human beings had access to their entire lifetime. To give you a good example, in earlier centuries, you could have theoretically learned everything written down. Like in the medieval ages, in an ideal scenario, you could have accessed all the books and in your lifetime theoretically read through pretty much all of them. With the information age, that's actually impossible. One of the big challenges of the information age is there is more information available than there is time for human beings to go through it. And the amount of information that's being created expands exponentially. I think, what was it, last year, the amount of information created doubled the amount of information created by all humans leading up to that year. And so that's one of the big things that comes out of the internet, is the ability to exchange information, to access information, things like that. Your parents or grandparents might talk about going to the library and accessing information. You can theoretically get access to almost all of that stuff through the internet. Now, that's not to say everything's on the internet, but there are some people who are really trying to get it there. Also, one other disclaimer about information. When I say information, I don't mean like facts, things like that necessarily. I mean just things to go through. So like a book, a fiction book, a non-fiction book, both of them can be considered information. The content of what I'm talking about is all over the place. So false data, false things, fiction, non-fiction, truth, chains of numbers, weather data collection, all of that is information in the definition that I'm using. So that's why it can get so big and grow so exponentially. But the other big theme that we're going to see in this, at least so far in the 21st century, is the global economy and globalization. That's one of the things we will see quite a bit in here. We're going to go into more detail about globalization and global economy in class activities. But one of the things that we're going to see with globalization is the globalization mentality is build up multinational corporations. And the idea is to save money, try and do things in the places where they will do it the cheapest. This is exactly an idea from the Industrial Revolution. The working class in America was not paid very well because that was a way of saving money for these big factories and whatnot. The same thing goes for certain aspects of globalization. The reason why clothing and various other products are cheap is because they can be mass-produced, and then to save money, the ways that they're mass-produced is through automation, interchangeable parts, mass production, and then often finding the place where you can do the work the cheapest. In class, we'll look at that. Part of the reason why China came into the forefront of manufacturing is because they put in the infrastructure and they put in the competitive rate of they have low-paid workers able to do these tasks. And the thing that's happened with China is they've gotten better and better and better, and they've expanded it from relatively cheap, simple to make things to more complicated devices like electronics and whatnot. And so that's one of the aspects of globalization that we run into. So this is often good for the consumers because that means cheaper and cheaper products, which makes things more and more accessible. The life you can live in the 21st century is better than the life of some of the wealthiest people in the world at any other point in history. You have access to some of the finest medical supplies, nutritional things, things like that. Globalization, for example, makes it possible for us to get avocados in South Dakota or oranges at any time of the year because you can take things from somewhere else and easily get them there. And we'll go into more detail in class with different activities. One of the issues that you're going to run into is this isn't always the greatest thing for various locales. For us in South Dakota, globalization is great because it allows us to get our farm products outside of the state and even further afield, which is good because while we produce a lot of beef, we have more cows than people in this state. That doesn't mean the people in the state can eat all of the food that is grown here. And so in farmers and ranchers, they depend on globalization to kind of get their goods out into markets because there's bound to be a market somewhere that has a demand for their product. Likewise, this is tricky for internet businesses or for local businesses because especially nowadays, especially in this current moment that we're in history, the ability to order stuff from pretty much anywhere online and have it shipped to your front door has created an unprecedented issue for the problems of collecting taxes and maintaining roads. The example that, if we have time, we'll look at is South Dakota versus Wayfair Incorporated, which was a Supreme Court case about how internet companies evade taxes. In the early 90s and the early 2000s, the internet has been heavily unregulated, and so there's a number of companies they could sell products and not necessarily have to worry about paying taxes in the places they're shipping to, just where they were operating out of. But that's a complicated issue that we'll cover somewhere else. Really, to wrap up this short lecture, going into the 21st century, that's probably why this lecture is a bit more important. There is the big things to be aware of is with the personal computer revolution and the internet, we have an information boom. And so one of the challenges that students are coming into, I'm coming into in this age, is you have an excess of information. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to go through all this information and use it to your advantage, whether it's in your work, your play, or in your personal life? You have access to more information than anyone else, perhaps, before, and that amount seems to only go upwards. The other challenge that we're going to run into is with globalization. The United States has been transitioning into a service economy, where instead of producing goods, as many Americans think of with the manufacturing industry, we're now into a place where providing services. For example, in the United States, one of the largest expanding markets is in healthcare services, whether that's being a doctor, a nurse, dealing with figuring out how insurance works. That's one of the expanding industries. The sales of products, not necessarily products being produced in this country, but selling these products in this country are one of the places. Additionally, jobs are being created in the computer industry as well. It's a lot to cover. It's a lot to look at. But we'll do that more in class with various activities as time remains, and I guess until later.